That wasn't a proposal. The Duke leaned in. The Vicar disagrees. The frog leaped from the soup tureen at precisely the wrong moment. Evangeline Blackwood had managed, through a combination of swift reflexes and sheer determination, to contain the previous 7 amphibian escapees to the kitchen. She had cornered 3 behind the flour barrel, scooped 2 from the milk pail before they could contaminate the morning's delivery, and personally wrestled the largest specimen from beneath her youngest brother's bed, where it had been croaking with sufficient volume to wake the dead. But the 8th frog, this final, wretched, surprisingly athletic frog, had eluded her entirely. And now, as she stood in the doorway of the vicarage's modest parlour, with her hair escaping its pins and her apron streaked with something she preferred not to examine too closely, she watched in horror as it launched itself directly at her sister Prudence's carefully arranged tea service. "Thomas!" She didn't shout. She never shouted. Shouting was for women who had not spent 7 years managing a household of 8 people on an income that would make a church mouse weep. But her voice carried what her mother had once called the tone, the particular frequency that could stop a charging bull at 20 paces. Her youngest brother, all of 8 years old with a gap-toothed grin and absolutely no sense of self-preservation, appeared from behind the settee where he had clearly been lying in wait. "I didn't do it." The frogs came from nowhere. "Did they?" Evangeline advanced into the room, her eyes tracking the creature as it hopped across the antimacassar. "Spontaneously appeared in our parlour through divine intervention?" "Maybe." Thomas's expression suggested he recognized the weakness of this defense, but was committed to seeing it through. Thomas Edmund Blackwood. She caught the frog mid-leap, a skill she had never expected to develop, and resented deeply for its necessity. The creature's legs kicked against her palm as she held it firmly but carefully. Thomas would never forgive her if she injured one of his precious specimens. "Father is expecting an important visitor this morning. The Duke of Hartwell is coming to discuss the church roof." "The Iron Duke?" Thomas's eyes went wide. "Is it true he once made a man cry just by looking at him?" "I'm certain that's an exaggeration." Evangeline deposited the frog into the bucket she had learned to keep near the door for exactly such emergencies. "And even if it weren't, you will not be testing the theory. You will take your frogs, all 8 of them, back to the stream where they belong. You will wash your hands and face. You will put on clean clothes. And you will not appear in this parlour until the Duke has departed. Am I understood?" Thomas opened his mouth, almost certainly to negotiate, but something in her expression must have conveyed the absolute limit of her patience. "Yes, Evie." "Good." She straightened, pushing a strand of honey-gold hair back from her face and leaving a streak of mud across her forehead in the process. "Now go, quickly, before—" "Evie!" Prudence's voice rang down from upstairs, carrying the particular pitch of romantic crisis that had become all too familiar over the past year. "Evie, I need you immediately." Evangeline closed her eyes. Just for a moment. Just long enough to count to 3 and remind herself that she loved her family, that they depended on her, that no one else would manage things if she did not. "Thomas, go. Prudence, I'm coming." She handed her brother the bucket of frogs, watched him scamper toward the kitchen door, and began climbing the narrow staircase to the room her sister shared with their youngest sibling, Mary. Prudence stood before the small mirror, her dark hair elaborately curled in a style far too sophisticated for a country vicarage. At 18, she had inherited their mother's beauty, the kind of delicate loveliness that inspired poetry from young men who had no business composing verse. She had also inherited their mother's romantic nature, which was rather more problematic. "I'm meeting him today," Prudence announced, her cheeks flushed with the particular glow of forbidden romance. "Mr. Crawford has arranged for us to encounter each other by chance at the milliner's shop. Isn't it wonderfully clever?" "It's wonderfully scandalous." Evangeline crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. Mr. Crawford is a fortune hunter with gambling debts, and you are a vicar's daughter with no fortune to hunt. What precisely do you imagine will come of these chance encounters? Love. Prudence said it with the absolute certainty of someone who had never been disappointed. True, eternal, passionate love. True, eternal, passionate poverty, more like. Evangeline softened her tone at her sister's wounded expression. Prue, I'm not trying to crush your dreams. But Mr. Crawford has nothing to offer you except pretty words and empty pockets. You deserve more than that. Perhaps I don't want more. Perhaps I want passion. Prudence turned from the mirror, her eyes bright with the defiance of youth. Perhaps I don't want to end up like... She stopped, but the words hung between them anyway, unspoken, but perfectly clear. Like you. Evangeline felt the familiar ache beneath her breastbone, the one she had learned to ignore so thoroughly that she sometimes forgot it was there at all. Perhaps you don't want to end up unmarried at 24, managing your father's household with no prospects and no complaints. She kept her voice light, almost succeeded in meaning it. I can understand the horror. Evie, I didn't mean... The Duke is arriving within the hour, and I have mud on my face and frog water on my apron. Evangeline straightened, her practical nature reasserting itself like armor sliding into place. We can discuss your romantic future later. For now, I need you to watch Thomas and ensure he doesn't release anything else into the house. And Prudence? She waited until her sister met her eyes. Don't go to the milliner's, please. Not today. She didn't wait for an answer. Prudence's choices were her own to make, and Evangeline had learned years ago that she couldn't protect everyone from themselves, no matter how desperately she tried. In her own small room, little more than a closet really, but private, which was worth more than space, she washed her face and hands, repinned her hair into something approaching respectability, and changed into her second-best dress. She owned 3, one for Sundays, one for receiving visitors, and one for everything else. The visiting dress was a sensible grey muslin that brought out the brown of her eyes, while proclaiming absolutely nothing about its wearer, except that she was presentable and knew her place, which was precisely what she wanted the Duke of Hartwell to see. A sensible woman, a practical woman, a woman who could speak intelligently about roof repairs and parish needs without expecting anything beyond polite acknowledgement. She had heard the rumours about him, of course. The Iron Duke, they called him, and not because of any military connection. Sebastian Ashworth, 7th Duke of Hartwell, had inherited his title 7 years ago under tragic circumstances that polite society discussed in whispers. His father's sudden death. His older brother's duel 6 months later fought, people said, over a woman who had played them against each other. The brother had died on the field, and the younger son had become Duke overnight. Since then, he had become legendary for his coldness. He attended Parliament, but never spoke. He fulfilled his social obligations, but never smiled. He had rejected every eligible woman in England with such thorough indifference that mothers had stopped pushing their daughters toward him entirely. The Ice Duke, some called him now, a man carved from frozen stone, incapable of warmth. Evangeline had no interest in thawing frozen dukes. She had a church roof to save, younger siblings to raise, and a parish to manage, while her father buried himself in theological texts and forgot that his family needed to eat. What she needed from the Duke of Hartwell was his patronage, his money, and his signature on the repair orders. What she absolutely did not need was for him to notice her at all. The Duke's carriage arrived at precisely 11 o'clock, because of course a man like that would be pathologically punctual. Evangeline watched from the parlour window as a vehicle emerged that probably cost more than her family's entire annual income. Matched black horses, gleaming brass fittings, a liveried driver who looked like he could crush stones with his disapproving stare. And then the Duke himself emerged, He was tall. That was her first thought, taller than she'd expected, broad-shouldered in a way that his perfectly tailored coat couldn't quite conceal. Dark hair, she noted, with unexpected threads of silver at the temples, despite the fact that he couldn't be much past 30. And his face. His face was handsome, objectively speaking. Strong jaw, straight nose, aristocratic cheekbones that spoke of centuries of careful breeding. But there was something closed about it, something shuttered, as if the features themselves had been arranged into a permanent expression of distant assessment. His eyes, even from this distance, looked cold. Evangeline stepped back from the window and smoothed her skirts. Her father was already in his study, had been there since dawn, surrounded by the ancient texts he loved more than practicality. She would need to fetch him. But when she knocked on the study door, she found him already rising from his desk, his kind face creased with the particular expression he wore when forced to engage with the material world. "Is he here, then? The Duke?" Reverend Blackwood fumbled with his spectacles, nearly knocking over an inkwell in the process. "Dreadful business, these patronage negotiations. I never know what to say to these great men." "You might try discussing the repair estimates," Evangeline suggested gently, steering him toward the door. "The ones we spent 3 weeks preparing, the ones that detail exactly what the church needs and what it will cost." Yes, of course." Her father patted his pockets vaguely. "Where did I put those papers?" "On your desk, under Aquinas." "Ah." He retrieved them, looking at her with the befuddled gratitude that never failed to twist her heart. "What would I do without you, my dear?" "End up living in the hedgerows, most likely," Evangeline thought, but didn't say. "You'd manage, father. Now come, we shouldn't keep His Grace waiting." The Duke was standing in their modest entryway when they descended, having been admitted by their single elderly servant, who looked appropriately terrified by the prospect of such an elevated visitor. He seemed even taller inside the house, his dark coat and immaculate cravat a stark contrast to their faded wallpaper and worn carpeting. His eyes swept the entryway with an expression that revealed absolutely nothing. Not disdain, not curiosity, not anything at all. It was as if he had simply catalogued the space and found it neither worthy of approval nor significant enough for criticism. Then his gaze landed on Evangeline, and for just a moment something flickered. Surprise, perhaps, that a woman had been present at all, or irritation that his business would be witnessed. The flicker vanished so quickly she might have imagined it. "Your Grace." Her father stepped forward, executing a bow that was sincere if not particularly graceful. "Welcome to our home. I am Reverend Blackwood, and this is my eldest daughter, Miss Evangeline Blackwood. She assists me with parish matters." "Reverend." The Duke's voice was like his face controlled, giving nothing away. He inclined his head a precise degree that acknowledged the introduction, while communicating clearly that further pleasantries would be unwelcome. "I received your letters regarding the church roof. Shall we discuss the matter?" No greeting for her, Evangeline noted, not even the courtesy of eye contact. She was dismissed as thoroughly as the faded wallpaper, catalogued and set aside. She should have been relieved. Wasn't this what she wanted? To be invisible? To manage things from the background? To avoid the notice of aristocrats who had nothing to offer her but condescension? And yet, something hot flickered in her chest, not quite anger, but its near cousin. Pride, perhaps. The particular irritation of a woman who had spent 7 years running a household, managing a parish, raising 5 children who were not her own, and who was now being looked through as if she were part of the furniture. "If you'll follow me to the study, Your Grace." She spoke before her father could, her voice perfectly polite and perhaps a shade too cool. "I've prepared the documentation you'll need to review." The Duke's eyes met hers then, really met them, for the first time. And whatever he saw there, the challenge perhaps, or simply the novelty of being addressed directly by a vicar's daughter, caused one dark eyebrow to rise a fraction of an inch. "Miss Blackwood." His tone gave nothing away, but he had acknowledged her existence. It felt like a small victory. "Lead the way." The study was cramped, made more so by the stacks of books that covered every surface. Evangeline had spent 3 hours the previous day clearing a path to the chairs and organizing the repair documents into something approaching a logical order. She had also hidden the more eccentric of her father's collections, the sheep's skull he was using for some theological argument about mortality, the collection of stones he believed contained fossilized evidence of the Great Flood. The Duke surveyed the chaos with that same blank expression. If he was appalled, he didn't show it. If he was amused, he concealed that equally well. "The estimates," Evangeline said, gesturing to the neat stack of papers on the desk. "The master builder from Hartford has assessed the damage. The main concern is the east transept, where water damage has compromised the supporting beams. If we don't address it before winter, we risk complete collapse." She watched the Duke's face as he examined the documents, searching for any sign that he understood the urgency, the fear that had kept her awake at night, imagining the ancient church crumbling onto Sunday worshippers. He read in silence for several minutes, turning pages with long fingers that bore no rings except a heavy signet on his left hand. Her father fidgeted in his chair, clearly desperate to return to his texts. Evangeline held herself still, waiting. Finally, the Duke looked up. "These estimates are thorough." "Thank you, Your Grace." "They are also substantial." He set the papers down. "You're asking for a considerable investment." "We're asking for what the repairs require." Evangeline kept her voice level. "The church has stood for 400 years. It would be a tragedy to lose it to preventable neglect. The church's maintenance is my responsibility as patron. I'm aware of my obligations." His tone sharpened just slightly. "What I'm questioning is the scope. Surely some of these repairs could be delayed, addressed incrementally over several years. And risk the roof collapsing onto your tenants during Sunday service?" The words came out before she could stop them. "With respect, Your Grace, incremental approaches won't prevent disaster. They'll simply postpone it until the cost in lives exceeds the cost in pounds." Silence fell. Her father made a small choking sound. The Duke's grey eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her suddenly aware of how badly she had overstepped. But she would not apologize. Not for this. Not when families she had known her entire life could be hurt because a wealthy man wanted to economize. "You speak plainly, Miss Blackwood." His voice was soft, dangerously so. "A fault, I'm told." She met his gaze without flinching. "But I find plain speaking more efficient than dancing around difficult truths." Something shifted in his expression. Still not warmth, nothing so human as that. But interest, perhaps. The slight sharpening of attention that came when something unexpected crossed his carefully ordered path. "The church," he said slowly. "I would like to see it, to assess the damage myself before committing to these estimates." "Of course, Your Grace." Her father leaped at the opportunity to end this tension. "Evangeline knows the building better than anyone. She can show you every stone. Then Miss Blackwood will accompany me." The Duke rose, his height suddenly overwhelming in the small space. "Shall we?" It was not a question, not really. And Evangeline, trapped by her own plain speaking into a situation she had never intended, had no choice but to agree. The walk to the church took 10 minutes by the path through the village, past the baker's shop and the small green where children played. The Duke walked beside her in silence, his long stride forcing her to hurry to keep pace. Villagers stopped and stared as they passed the Iron Duke, here, walking with the vicar's daughter as if it were the most natural thing in the world. It was not natural at all. Evangeline felt the weight of every gaze, the whispers that would follow them like ripples in a pond. By nightfall, The entire parish would know that she had been seen alone with the Duke of Hartwell. Speculation would run rampant. Let them talk, she told herself firmly. She had done nothing wrong and would do nothing wrong. She was showing him a church roof, not conducting an affair. The church was beautiful, even in its decay. Norman stonework, she had been told, though later generations had added Gothic windows and a bell tower that was entirely out of proportion, but somehow charming. She loved this building, had been baptized here, had sung in the choir as a child, had sat with her mother during the final services before her death. She would not let it crumble. "This way, Your Grace." She led him through the heavy wooden doors into the cool dimness of the nave. Light filtered through stained glass, casting coloured shadows across stone floors worn smooth by centuries of feet. The Duke stopped just inside the entrance, and for the first time his expression changed. Something like recognition crossed his features, not pleasure exactly, but a kind of reluctant acknowledgement. "It's old," he said. 400 years. As I mentioned. She moved ahead of him, pointing toward the east transept. "You can see the water damage here, where the roof has begun to fail. The master builder believes the original lead was replaced sometime in the last century with inferior materials." She took him through the building methodically, showing him every crack, every stain, every structural concern the builder had identified. He asked questions, intelligent ones, she was forced to admit. Questions that showed he understood architecture, that he had experience assessing buildings, that he was not simply a wealthy man throwing money at problems he didn't comprehend. It confused her, this evidence of competence beneath the cold exterior. The rumors had painted him as a statue, frozen and unfeeling. But statues did not ask about load-bearing walls or inquire whether the existing foundations could support additional reinforcement. They had reached the vestry, a small room behind the altar used for storage and preparation, when the first rumble of thunder sounded. "The weather is turning." The Duke glanced toward the window, where grey clouds had gathered with surprising speed. "We should conclude our inspection." But even as he spoke, the rain began, not a gentle shower, but a sudden deluge, the kind of summer storm that came without warning and departed just as quickly. Lightning cracked across the sky, close enough that Evangeline felt the vibration in her bones. "We cannot walk back in this." She moved to the window, watching water sheet across the churchyard. "It will pass soon, but for now, we wait." The Duke's jaw tightened, as if the weather had personally inconvenienced him. They stood in awkward silence as the storm raged. The vestry was small, barely large enough for both of them, and Evangeline was suddenly, painfully aware of how inappropriate this situation was. Alone with a man, unmarried, no chaperone in sight. If anyone found out, but no one would find out. The storm would pass. They would return to the vicarage separately. No one need ever know. "You've been managing this parish since your mother's death." His voice startled her. She had not expected conversation, had assumed he would simply wait in frozen silence until escape became possible. "Yes, Your Grace." She kept her eyes on the window. "My father is a scholar. His interests lie more with the theoretical aspects of his calling than the practical ones. And you've raised your siblings as well. Someone had to." She heard him shift behind her, the rustle of expensive fabric against stone. "That's a significant burden for a young woman. You can't have been more than 17 when she passed." 16. She turned to face him, something in his tone, not sympathy exactly, but something uncomfortably close to understanding making her defensive. And it wasn't a burden. It was simply what needed to be done. That doesn't preclude it from being difficult. Many things are difficult, Your Grace. We manage them anyway. His grey eyes studied her with that unsettling intensity. "You're very angry." "I beg your pardon?" "Not at me specifically. though I suspect I've provided additional fuel. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but the suggestion of one. Generally angry. At your situation. At the obligations that have been placed upon you. You presume a great deal about my inner life, Your Grace, based on a 20-minute acquaintance? Perhaps. He leaned against the vestry wall, and somehow the casual posture made him seem more human than anything he'd done before. Or perhaps I recognize the particular fury of someone who has sacrificed everything for duty and received nothing in return but more duty. The accuracy of it hit her like a physical blow. She felt exposed, stripped bare by observation she had not invited and could not deny. "Why are you saying this?" Her voice came out sharper than she intended. "What possible interest could you have in my inner life?" "None whatsoever." But he said it strangely, as if the words surprised even him. "It was merely an observation. Forget I spoke." He turned toward the window, presenting her with his profile, that strong jaw, those silver-threaded temples, the rigid line of his shoulders. And Evangeline, who had spent 7 years perfecting the art of reading people, saw something she had not expected to find. He was lonely. Not sad, precisely. Not even unhappy in any way he would acknowledge. But lonely in that bone-deep way that came from years of holding everyone at a distance, of building walls so high that no one could ever scale them. She recognized it because she built walls of her own, different materials, different architecture, but the same essential purpose. Keep people out. Keep your heart safe, need no one, and you cannot be disappointed when no one appears. "Why do you never smile?" The question escaped before she could stop it. His head turned, those grey eyes meeting hers with something like shock. "What?" "The village calls you the Iron Duke. They say you once made a man cry simply by looking at him. They say you've never smiled in your life." She should stop. She should absolutely stop. But some demon had possessed her tongue. "But you're not iron. You're just careful. Extremely, relentlessly careful. What are you so afraid of?" Silence stretched between them, broken only by the thunder and rain. She had gone too far. She had absolutely gone too far. This was a duke, not some parishioner she could question about their spiritual struggles. He could destroy her family with a word, withdraw his patronage, leave the church to crumble. And she had asked him what he was afraid of. "Miss Blackwood," his voice was quiet, controlled, "you are perhaps the most astonishing woman I have ever encountered." Is that a compliment or a condemnation? I genuinely don't know. He held her gaze, and something crackled between them. Not warmth, not yet, but the possibility of warmth. The first suggestion that fire might exist beneath all that ice. "No one speaks to me as you do." "Perhaps that's the problem." She lifted her chin. "Perhaps if more people spoke to you plainly, you wouldn't be quite so frozen. Or perhaps I would destroy them for their impertinence." "Perhaps." She didn't look away. "But you haven't destroyed me yet." The thunder cracked again, impossibly loud. And then there was a sound that was not thunder, a groaning, splintering crash from the main church that shook the vestry walls. "The roof!" Evangeline didn't think, simply moved, wrenching open the vestry door and running toward the nave. What she found stopped her cold. A section of the east transept had collapsed exactly where she had warned it would, bringing down centuries of stone and timber in a pile of rubble that blocked the main entrance completely. Rain poured through the gaping hole overhead, drenching the pews beneath, and dust still swirled in the air from the violence of the fall. "The door!" She ran to it, tried to push through the debris, but the stones were too heavy, too densely packed. "We have to—" "Miss Blackwood." The Duke's hand closed around her arm, pulling her back. "Stop. You'll hurt yourself. We're trapped." The reality hit her with the force of the falling roof. The only other exit is through the bell tower, and that staircase hasn't been safe for 20 years. She turned to face him, and in the grey light filtering through the broken roof, she saw something new in his expression. Not panic, a man like this probably didn't experience panic, but a kind of grim resignation. "Then we wait," he said. "Someone will come looking eventually." Eventually. She looked around the ruined church, at the rain still pouring through the collapsed roof, at the growing darkness as the storm swallowed what remained of the afternoon light. "Your Grace, it's getting dark. If no one realizes we're here. Your father knows where you went. My father knows I went to the church. He does not know the roof has collapsed. He will assume I'm waiting out the storm somewhere sensible." She heard the edge in her own voice and fought to control it. "He won't worry until well after nightfall, and by then, she would have spent hours alone with an unmarried man. In a church, certainly, but alone nonetheless. Her reputation would be shredded beyond repair." "Ah!" The Duke released her arm, stepping back with an expression that suggested he had only now considered the social implications. "That is problematic. That's one word for it." They stared at each other across the ruined nave, the rain drumming overhead and the last light fading from the sky. And Evangeline, who had spent 7 years managing crises with competence and calm, felt something she had not allowed herself in all that time. Fear. Not of the Duke. Despite his reputation, despite his coldness, she did not believe he would harm her. But fear of what would happen when they were discovered, because they would be discovered, eventually. Fear of the whispers, the scandal, the damage to her family's already precarious position. Fear that everything she had worked for was about to crumble, just like the roof. "We should return to the vestry." The Duke's voice was steady, practical. "It's more sheltered there, and warmer. There's no point standing in the rain." He was right. Of course he was right. Practical solutions to practical problems, the only thing she knew how to offer. She followed him back to the small room, watching as he shrugged out of his ruined coat and laid it across a trunk to dry. His waistcoat was impeccable, of course, because the Duke of Hartwell would never be anything less than perfectly put together. But there was mud on his boots and dust on his shoulders, and he looked for just a moment almost human. "The damage is worse than your estimates suggested," he said, settling onto a wooden chair as if it were a throne. "The damage is exactly what I told you it would be." She remained standing, too agitated to sit. "If we had begun repairs months ago, when I first wrote to your steward—" "My steward did not forward those letters." His voice was flat. "I have only just learned of them. He has been removed from his position." "Oh." That took some of the wind from her sails. "I assumed you knew, that you were simply being cold, indifferent, heartless." He almost smiled. "I'm certainly all of those things, Miss Blackwood, but not about my responsibilities. When I inherited, I made certain commitments. I may fulfill them without enthusiasm, but I fulfill them nonetheless." "Why without enthusiasm?" She sat on the opposite chair, drawn despite herself into conversation. "You have wealth, position, power. Most men would find considerable enthusiasm in such circumstances. Most men did not acquire those things the way I did." He said it simply, without self-pity, but the words carried weight. She remembered the rumors, the father's death, the brother's duel, the whispers about a woman who had played them against each other. "Your brother," she said carefully. "The stories say. The stories are true." He looked at her directly, and in the fading light, his grey eyes seemed almost silver. "My brother fell in love with a woman who encouraged his attention while secretly cultivating mine. She wanted a duke, you see, and wasn't particular about which son provided the title. When my father died unexpectedly, the inheritance was suddenly in question. My brother held the title, but I had always been closer to our father, and she miscalculated. She told my brother I had been pursuing her. She told me he had been forcing his attention on her. We both believed her. Evangeline felt cold settle in her stomach. The duel was over her honor, which didn't exist. His voice was steady, almost frighteningly so. My brother challenged me. I refused. I couldn't fight him, couldn't risk killing him. So he found another man to take my place, another man who had supposedly insulted her. The duel was clumsy. He died on the field, and she vanished the next morning, presumably in search of another title to pursue. The silence that followed was different from before, heavier, more complete. That wasn't your fault. She spoke quietly. The lies, the manipulation that was her doing, not yours. And yet. He looked at his hands, spread on his knees. My brother is dead. My father is dead. I am the Duke of Hartwell because two men who should have lived instead of me did not. And every day, I wonder whether something in our family, some capacity for destructive passion, made us vulnerable to her schemes. Whether we would have destroyed each other eventually, with or without her help. That's absurd. His head snapped up. I beg your pardon? It's absurd. She leaned forward, urgency making her bold. You're not responsible for your brother's choices, or your father's death, or some woman's manipulations. You're responsible for what you do with the position you've been given. And from what I can see, you've done nothing with it at all except build walls and push everyone away. You presume to lecture me on how to live my life? Someone should. She was too far in to stop now. You've decided you're broken, dangerous, incapable of connection. But that's not insight, it's cowardice. It's easier to be cold than to risk being hurt again. It's safer to feel nothing than to feel everything. But it's not living, Your Grace. It's just existing. He stared at her as if she had grown a second head. And then, incredibly, impossibly, the corner of his mouth quirked upward. You're not even slightly afraid of me, are you? Should I be? Everyone else is. Then everyone else is a fool. She stood, moving to the window where the rain still fell. You're a man, not a monster. A wounded man, a grieving man, a man who has convinced himself that isolation is strength. But I've seen you with my brother the way you helped him find his rabbit without a moment's hesitation. I've seen you listen to these repair estimates with actual attention and intelligence. There's someone beneath all that ice, Your Grace. Someone who might even be worth knowing. She didn't look at him. Couldn't look at him. She had said too much, revealed too clearly that she had been watching, noticing, caring when she had no right to care at all. Evangeline. Her name in his voice, not Miss Blackwood, but her actual name made her turn despite herself. He had risen from his chair and crossed to stand behind her, close, too close. She could see the individual threads of silver in his dark hair, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the surprising softness of his mouth in repose. No one has spoken to me honestly in 7 years, he said quietly. Not since my brother died. They're too afraid, or too calculating, or too indifferent to bother. But you, he shook his head slowly. You walked into that study and challenged me before I'd been in your house 5 minutes. I shouldn't have. No, you shouldn't have. But he was almost smiling again. And yet I find I prefer it to the alternative. I find I prefer the truth, however uncomfortable, to the pleasant lies everyone else offers. Be careful what you wish for, Your Grace. Her voice came out strange, breathless. The truth is rarely comfortable. Sebastian. What? My name. He held her gaze with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. If we're going to be trapped here together, if you're going to lecture me about my failures with such abandon, you might as well use it. That would be improper, scandalous, ill-advised. His smile was real now, small but genuine, and it transformed his face entirely. But as you've pointed out, we're already beyond propriety. We've been alone together for hours. The damage to your reputation is done. That's not Evie. The voice came from outside, distant, but growing closer. Evangeline, where are you? Her father. She moved toward the vestry door, then stopped as the implications crashed over her. Her father was coming, which meant rescue was imminent, but it also meant discovery. He would find her here, alone with the Duke, in the darkness, standing far too close together. Miss Blackwood, Evangeline, wait. Sebastian's hand caught her arm. Let me speak to him. Let me explain the circumstances. There's nothing to explain. We were trapped by the storm. Nothing improper occurred. And do you think that will matter? His grey eyes were steady on hers. Do you think the village will believe nothing happened simply because nothing happened? Your reputation? My reputation is my concern. And yet I am the cause of its damage. He released her arm, but didn't step back. I won't let you suffer for a situation I could have prevented. Before she could ask what he meant, the vestry door burst open. Her father stood in the doorway, lantern in hand, his kind face creased with worry, and behind him 6 villagers, their expressions shifting from concern to something far more complicated as they took in the scene before them. The Duke and the Vicar's daughter, alone, in the darkness, standing close enough to touch. Papa! Evangeline stepped forward, her heart racing. The roof collapsed, we were trapped. Nothing. My dear child, thank heavens you're safe. Her father crossed to her, taking her hands. We saw the damage from outside, feared the worst. She's unharmed, Reverend. Sebastian's voice was calm, controlled. Miss Blackwood showed great presence of mind in ensuring we remained safe until rescue arrived. Yes, but... Her father looked between them, and she saw the moment understanding dawned. The moment he realized what the rest of the village would conclude. The circumstances are what they are. One of the village women, Mrs. Potter, the baker's wife, a notorious gossip, edged closer, her eyes bright with scandalized delight. Ours alone, Reverend, in the dark, a young unmarried woman and a man of his reputation. There was no impropriety. Evangeline's voice came out sharper than she intended. We were trapped by circumstances beyond our control. The Duke behaved with complete propriety. That's as may be. Mrs. Potter's smile was poison wrapped in sweetness. But it's not what people will say, is it? It's not what they'll believe. The silence that followed was devastating. Evangeline looked at the faces surrounding her, some sympathetic, some scandalized, some simply curious, and felt the ground crumbling beneath her feet. Papa, she turned to her father. Desperate. You know me. You know I would never... Of course, my dear, of course. But his eyes were worried, and she could see him calculating the damage, the whispers that would follow, the stain on the family's reputation that no amount of truth could completely erase. There is a solution. Sebastian's voice cut through the growing murmur of voices. A way to protect Miss Blackwood's reputation, absolutely. Everyone turned to look at him. He stood in the lantern light, his ruined coat over one arm, his expression the familiar mask of aristocratic composure. But his eyes, when they met Evangeline's, held something she couldn't quite read. No. She shook her head, suddenly certain she knew what he was about to say. Your Grace Sebastian, don't... Reverend Blackwood. He addressed her father formally, ignoring her protest. Given the circumstances in which your daughter and I find ourselves, given the damage that may be done to her reputation through no fault of her own, I believe there is only one honourable course of action." "Your Grace, surely that's not necessary," her father began. "It is entirely necessary." Sebastian's voice was steady, certain. "I am asking for your daughter's hand in marriage." The gasps from the assembled villagers filled the small space. Mrs. Potter looked like Christmas had come early. Evangeline felt the world tilt sideways, certainty dissolving into chaos. "You can't be serious." Her voice came out as a whisper. "We barely know each other. You don't even like me." "I like you better than anyone I've met in 7 years." He said it simply, as if stating an obvious fact. "You're honest, intelligent, and completely unafraid of telling me when I'm being a fool. At minimum, we would be interesting company for each other." "At minimum?" She heard her voice rising and couldn't stop it. "Marriage should be more than interesting company. Marriage should be love." His mouth twisted. "Miss Blackwood, you have spent the last hour informing me that I am incapable of genuine emotion. Perhaps you're right. But I am capable of honour, and my honour demands that I not leave you to face scandal when I have the power to prevent it." "I don't want to be married out of honour." "Then what do you want?" The question hung in the air between them, and Evangeline, who had spent 7 years wanting nothing for herself, who had buried every dream and desire beneath duty and obligation, found she had no answer. "That's what I thought." His voice softened, just slightly. "You've forgotten how to want things. You've been so busy managing everyone else's lives that you've stopped imagining anything for yourself. But I'm offering you something, Evangeline. A chance, a position, a future beyond this vicarage and its endless demands. You would never have to worry about money again. Your siblings would be provided for. Your father's parish would receive every repair it needs and more. You're trying to buy me. I'm trying to save you." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "And perhaps, if I'm honest, I'm trying to save myself. You're the first person in 7 years who has looked at me and seen something other than a title or a threat. I don't know if that's enough to build a marriage on, but I know it's more than I expected to find." She stared at him, this cold, wounded, complicated man who had somehow become the center of her world in the span of a single afternoon. Nothing made sense. Everything had changed too fast. She needed time to think, time to understand, time to Evangeline. Her father's voice was gentle. "My dear, the Duke has made an honourable offer. Under the circumstances, I think. You think I should accept. I think you should consider it carefully." He took her hands again, his eyes kind. "You've given so much to this family. Perhaps it's time you took something for yourself. Marriage to a stranger isn't—" "I've known him for an hour," Sebastian interrupted, "and in that hour you've already seen more of me than most people do in years. Am I truly a stranger, Evangeline? Or am I simply someone you haven't decided whether to trust yet?" She had no answer. Her mind spun with arguments, objections, fears. But beneath it all, something stirred that she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Foolish, dangerous, irrational hope. "The banns would need to be read," her father said quietly. 3 Sundays, at minimum. I have a special license." Sebastian's voice was matter-of-fact. "I obtain one every year in case of need. The wedding could take place immediately." "Immediately?" Evangeline heard her voice crack. "You cannot be serious." "The longer we wait, the more the scandal grows." He held her gaze steadily. "If we marry tonight, the story becomes a romance the Duke, swept away by passion, unable to wait for the woman who captured his heart. If we wait weeks, it becomes a forced arrangement, a scandal barely papered over. Which tale would you prefer the village to tell? He was right. She hated that he was right. Miss Blackwood? Mrs. Potter pushed forward, her expression a mixture of avid curiosity and false concern. The Duke makes a fair point. Your reputation... Think of your sisters, dear. Think of their prospects if this scandal attaches to the family. Prudence. Mary. The younger girl she had protected and raised. If Evangeline's reputation was destroyed, theirs would suffer too. The stain would spread, touching everyone she loved. And Sebastian was offering her a way out. A terrifying, life-altering, completely unexpected way out. One condition. She spoke before she could lose her nerve. We spend the next month getting to know each other. A true courtship, not just a legal arrangement. If at the end of that month either of us wishes to withdraw, we find a way to do so quietly. Done. He agreed so quickly she suspected he'd expected resistance. And I will not be managed, or controlled, or treated as an acquisition. I am your partner, or I am nothing. I would expect nothing less. And, she took a deep breath, and you will try, to feel, to connect, to be more than the frozen man the world believes you to be. If this marriage is to mean anything, you must actually participate in it. For the first time, she saw uncertainty flicker across his face. I cannot promise to be something I am not. I'm not asking you to be something else. I'm asking you to try being yourself, the self you've buried beneath all that ice. The man who helped my brother find his rabbit. The man who listened to me lecture him about his failures without once pulling rank. The man who is standing here, in a ruined church, offering marriage to a vicar's daughter he met this morning. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. That man is not frozen, Sebastian. That man is afraid, and I am asking you to be brave. The silence stretched between them. The villagers watched with bated breath. Her father stood frozen, hands still clasped, waiting. And Sebastian Ashworth, the 7th Duke of Hartwell, the Iron Duke who never smiled and never felt and never risked anything at all. Sebastian looked at her with something that might have been wonder. You're asking a great deal. Yes. You barely know me. I know enough. You could be making a terrible mistake. I could. She lifted her chin. But I've spent 7 years being careful, being practical, being safe. Perhaps it's time I made a terrifying choice and trusted it would work out. He laughed. Actually laughed a short, surprised sound, as if he had forgotten what laughter felt like. You're extraordinary. I'm exhausted and dirty, and about to marry a man I've known for 6 hours. She couldn't quite keep the hysteria from her voice. Extraordinary is not the word I would choose. It's the one I'm choosing. He reached out and took her hand the first time he had touched her deliberately, without urgency or accident. His fingers were warm against hers, steady and strong. Miss Evangeline Blackwood, I cannot promise you love. I cannot promise you happiness. But I can promise you honesty and loyalty and my very best efforts to be a man worthy of your terrifying directness. He paused, something shifting in his grey eyes. Will that do? For a beginning? She should say no. Every practical bone in her body screamed that this was madness, that marriages required more than mutual attraction and interesting conversation, that she was risking everything on a man she barely understood. But her heart, her foolish, starving, hopeful heart, whispered something different. It will do, she said, for a beginning. Her father stepped forward, and she saw that his eyes were damp. My dear children, for that is how I must think of you both now, if you are truly decided. We are. Sebastian's voice was firm. He hadn't released her hand. Then with God as my witness, and these good people of the parish. The Reverend Blackwood's voice took on the cadence of ceremony, the rhythm that had shaped every Sunday of Evangeline's life. "I pronounce you man and wife." It took a moment for the words to register. Evangeline stared at her father, then at Sebastian, then at the assembled villagers, who were watching with expressions ranging from shock to delight. "That wasn't a proposal," Sebastian said slowly. "That was merely an agreement to try." "The vicar," her father said mildly, "disagrees." And Evangeline, standing in a ruined church with her hand in a duke's grasp and her entire future suddenly, terrifyingly unknown, began to laugh. She was married. Heaven help them both. She was actually married. The morning after her wedding, Evangeline woke in her childhood bed and stared at the water-stained ceiling she had memorized over 24 years of existence. For a long, disorienting moment, she convinced herself it had all been a dream. The storm, the collapse, the Duke's unexpected proposal, her father's precipitous pronouncement. Then she turned her head and saw the heavy signet ring on the bedside table, the one Sebastian had pressed into her palm before departing for the inn. "Keep this," he had said, his grey eyes unreadable in the lantern light. "As proof, if you wake tomorrow and doubt it happened." She had doubted. She was still doubting. But the ring was real, solid gold, warming quickly in her palm as she picked it up, and the weight of it made everything else real too. She was the Duchess of Hartwell. The title felt absurd, like a costume several sizes too large. Duchesses were elegant women who hosted balls and wore diamonds, and never, under any circumstances, had frog water on their aprons. Duchesses did not wake in cramped vicarage bedrooms with their youngest brother pounding on the door. "Evie! Evie, wake up! There's a carriage outside, and Prudence says you're married, and father won't explain anything, and—" She opened the door before Thomas could break it down. He stood in the hallway, gap-toothed and wild-haired and practically vibrating with excitement. "Is it true? Did you really marry the Duke? Are you a princess now?" "Duchess," she corrected automatically. "And princesses are never mind. Yes, it's true. I married the Duke." Thomas's eyes went impossibly wide. "Does that mean I can visit his house? Does he have horses? Does he have a library? Does he have—" "Thomas." She knelt to meet his eyes, her heart clenching at the innocent excitement in his face. "I don't know what happens next. The Duke and I have an arrangement. We're going to spend time getting to know each other before we decide anything permanent." "But you're already married." "Yes, but how did one explain the complexities of adult relationships to an 8-year-old? Sometimes grown-ups need time to figure things out, even after they've made big decisions." Thomas considered this with the grave seriousness only children could muster. "Like when I decided I wanted a snake for a pet, but then I had to figure out where it would sleep and what it would eat. Exactly like that." She smoothed his unruly hair. "Now go wash your face and put on clean clothes. We have a visitor coming, and I need you presentable." She dressed carefully, choosing the Sunday dress because it seemed appropriate for meeting one's husband on the first day of marriage. The grey muslin went back into the wardrobe, too plain for a duchess, though she suspected she would wear it again soon enough. Habits died hard, and she wasn't ready to become someone else entirely. The face in the small mirror looked the same as always, honey gold hair that refused to stay pinned, brown eyes that her mother had called warm, and she privately thought of as ordinary, a scattering of freckles across her nose that no amount of lemon juice had ever faded. Nothing about her appearance suggested duchess. Nothing suggested she belonged anywhere near a man like Sebastian Ashworth. And yet, she remembered the way he had looked at her in the vestry, the surprise in his voice when he called her extraordinary. She remembered the warmth of his hand around hers, the unexpected sound of his laughter. Perhaps belonging was less about appearance than about something else entirely, something she hadn't yet learned to name. Sebastian arrived at precisely 10 o'clock, because of course he did. She watched from her window as his carriage pulled into the vicarage yard, as he emerged looking irritatingly perfect, despite what must have been an uncomfortable night at the village's only inn. His dark coat was immaculate, his cravat precisely tied, his expression revealing nothing of whatever thoughts churned beneath the surface. She went downstairs to meet him, passing Prudence on the landing. Her sister's face was a complicated mixture of romantic delight and sisterly concern. "He's very handsome," Prudence whispered. "In a terrifying sort of way." "He's not terrifying. He looks terrifying. Looks can be deceiving." Evangeline squeezed her sister's hand. "Trust me." The parlour felt too small with Sebastian in it, his height and presence overwhelming the modest space. He stood by the window where she had watched him arrive yesterday. Was it only yesterday? And turned when she entered. "Your Grace." She dropped into a curtsy, suddenly uncertain of the protocols. How did one greet a husband who was still essentially a stranger? "Sebastian," he corrected. "We agreed on that, I believe. And you should not curtsy to your own husband." "I should not do many things that I have nonetheless done in the past day." She straightened, meeting his eyes. "Married a man I barely know, for instance." "Regrets already?" "Questions?" She moved to sit, gesturing for him to do the same. "We have much to discuss, your Sebastian. Practicalities that were rather overlooked in last night's excitement." He sat in the chair across from her, crossing one long leg over the other with unconscious elegance. "Ask your questions, then." "Where will I live?" "Hartwell Park, when the situation is resolved. For now, I thought it best if you remained here while I make arrangements. The house has been neglected in recent years. It requires preparation before a duchess can properly take residence." "I'm not particularly concerned with proper residence. I've lived in a vicarage all my life." "Nonetheless." His tone brooked no argument. "I will not bring my wife to a house that is not ready for her. Call it pride, if you like." She studied him, noting the tension in his jaw despite his casual posture. "What are you not telling me?" "A great many things, I expect. We've known each other barely a day." "Sebastian." He was silent for a long moment. Then, "The house holds memories. Difficult ones. I have not spent significant time there since my brother's death, preferring my London residence or my hunting lodge in Scotland. Returning is not simple. And you would need to return if your wife was in residence." "Yes." She absorbed this, adding it to the slowly accumulating picture of the man she had married. Wounded, yes. Avoiding pain, certainly. But also honest, at least about his limitations. "Then we take time," she said. "As we agreed. You make your arrangements. I settle my affairs here. My family will need to adjust, and I cannot simply abandon them without preparation." "Your family." He leaned forward slightly. "I meant what I said last night. They will be provided for, all of them. Your father's parish, your siblings' futures, whatever they need." "That's very generous. It's practical. You cannot give me your full attention if you're worried about their welfare." "And you want my full attention?" Something flickered in his grey eyes. Heat, quickly suppressed. "I find myself wanting many things I did not expect, Miss Black Evangeline. Your attention chief among them." The air between them seemed to thicken. She remembered the moment in the vestry when he had stepped close enough to touch, the intensity of his gaze, the unexpected vulnerability beneath his careful words. He was attracted to her, that much was clear. But attraction was not love, and marriage required more than mere wanting. "We should establish some rules," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "for this courtship period." "Rules?" His eyebrow rose. "You wish to impose regulations on our marriage?" Guidelines, then. Expectations. She folded her hands in her lap, a gesture of composure she did not quite feel. We agreed to 1 month of getting to know each other. During that time we should meet regularly daily, if possible. We should be honest with each other, even when honesty is uncomfortable. And we should... She hesitated. Should what? We should try to actually know each other. Not as Duke and Vicar's daughter, not as Scandal and Salvation, but as Sebastian and Evangeline, the people beneath the circumstances. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he nodded. Agreed. Though I should warn you, the person beneath my circumstances is not particularly pleasant company. I'll be the judge of that. You usually are. The corner of his mouth quirked upward. Very well. Daily meetings, radical honesty, and genuine effort to see beyond the surfaces we present to the world. He extended his hand across the space between them. Do we have an agreement, wife? She took his hand, feeling again the warmth and strength of his grip. We do, husband. The word felt strange in her mouth, husband, but not unpleasant. Not unpleasant at all. The first week of Evangeline's marriage passed in a blur of adjustment and negotiation. Sebastian came to the vicarage each morning at 10, punctual as clockwork, and stayed until midday. They walked in the garden, sat in the parlour, took meals with her family. He was unfailingly polite to her father, surprisingly patient with her younger siblings, and coolly civil to Prudence, who continued to find him terrifying despite Evangeline's reassurances. But with Evangeline herself, something shifted when they were alone. The ice cracked, little by little, revealing glimpses of the man beneath. He spoke of his childhood at Hartwell Park, the happy years before his mother's death, the difficult years after, the rivalry with his brother that had somehow curdled into something destructive. He spoke of his years at Oxford, his grand tour cut short by his father's illness, his slow and reluctant assumption of a title he had never expected to inherit. And she spoke too, more than she had ever spoken to anyone. About her mother's death and the weight of responsibility that had settled on her shoulders at 16, about the loneliness of being needed by everyone and known by no one, about her dreams half forgotten, buried so deep she had to excavate them like ancient artifacts of travel, of education, of a life beyond the narrow confines of her parish. You wanted to be a scholar, Sebastian said one afternoon, as they sat in the garden beneath an oak tree that had sheltered her childhood games. Like your father. I wanted to study history, ancient civilizations particularly. She laughed, embarrassed. Foolish dreams for a woman with no dowry and 5 siblings to raise. Not foolish. His voice was quiet. Hartwell Park has an extensive library, 3,000 volumes, at last count, including a significant collection of classical texts. You would be welcome to make use of it. She stared at him. You're serious? I rarely joke about books. He paused. Or about anything, as you've no doubt noticed. You joke, she said softly, when you think no one is watching, when you forget to be the Iron Duke for a moment. You see too much. Perhaps you hide too little, at least from me. The look he gave her was complicated gratitude and fear, and something else, something that made her breath catch. They had not touched since that first handshake, not beyond the casual brushes of fingers passing teacups or shoulders bumping in doorways. But she was increasingly aware of him physically, the breadth of his shoulders, the elegant length of his fingers, the way his voice dropped to a lower register when they were alone. She was also increasingly aware that this arranged marriage was becoming something else entirely, something dangerous, something real. The second week brought complications. News of the Duke of Hartwell's sudden marriage had spread beyond the village, carried by gossip and newspaper reports to the wider world. The story varied depending on the source. Some versions painted it as a grand romance. the cold duke thawed by love at first sight. Others hinted at scandal barely averted, a vicar's daughter who had schemed her way into a title. Evangeline tried to ignore the whispers, the speculative looks, the letters that arrived daily from London society matrons eager to befriend or destroy the new Duchess. But when Sebastian arrived at the vicarage with a grim expression and a formal card in his hand, she knew the outside world had finally breached their careful bubble. "My aunt is coming," he said, dropping into his usual chair with uncharacteristic heaviness. "The Dowager Duchess. She will arrive tomorrow." "Your aunt." Evangeline set down the book she had been pretending to read. "I take it this is not a pleasant development." "Augusta Ashworth is many things, but pleasant is not among them." He rubbed his temples, a gesture of weariness she had never seen from him before. "She managed my father, managed my brother, and has spent the last 7 years attempting to manage me. She will not be pleased that I married without her approval. Does she need to approve? No, but she will make her displeasure known, loudly and at length, until I either capitulate or expire from exhaustion." He looked at her, and something in his expression softened. "I should have warned you. I should have prepared you for the reality of what you've married into, not just me, but my family, such as it is. The expectations, the scrutiny." "I knew there would be scrutiny. You knew there would be village gossip. This is different." He leaned forward, his grey eyes intent. "Augusta will examine every aspect of your life, your family, your education, your manners. She will find fault wherever she can and exploit it ruthlessly. She does not believe in weakness, hers or anyone else's." "She sounds delightful." The unexpected dryness in her voice surprised a laugh from him. "She is absolutely dreadful. But she is also the only family I have left, and I cannot simply dismiss her." "I wouldn't ask you to." Evangeline squared her shoulders, feeling the familiar steel settle into her spine, the same steel that had carried her through 7 years of managing crises. "Let her come. Let her examine and judge and find fault. I have survived worse than a disapproving aunt." "Have you?" "I have survived my mother's death, my father's abstraction, the raising of 5 children on insufficient funds, and the management of a parish that depended on me entirely. I have survived loneliness and exhaustion, and the slow death of every dream I ever held." She met his eyes steadily. "I think I can survive a Dowager Duchess." Sebastian was silent for a long moment. Then he rose from his chair, crossed the space between them, and did something he had never done before. He knelt at her feet. "What are you doing?" Her voice came out breathless. "Acknowledging." His hands covered hers where they lay in her lap. "I have spent our marriage thus far cataloguing your virtues and wondering how I failed to see them immediately. But I have not said, I have not properly acknowledged that you are remarkable, Evangeline, that your strength puts mine to shame, that I am more grateful every day for the accident that brought us together. Sebastian, let me finish." His grip tightened slightly. "My aunt will arrive tomorrow. She will be cruel, because cruelty is her nature. She will say things designed to wound you, to make you doubt yourself, to make you regret this marriage. And I need you to know, before she arrives, that nothing she says will change my regard for you. Nothing she says will make me wish I had not married you. You are my wife, Evangeline. Whatever else happens, that will not change." She stared down at him, this proud, wounded, complicated man who knelt before her like a supplicant and felt something shift in her chest. A wall crumbling, a defense giving way. "I thought you couldn't promise me love," she whispered. "I can't." His voice was rough. "I don't know if I'm capable of it, if whatever broke in me when my brother died can ever be repaired. But I can promise you loyalty. I can promise you protection. And I can promise that I will try, Evangeline. every day, to be the husband you deserve." She freed one hand from his grip and touched his face, the first deliberate touch between them since their wedding. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, rough with the faint stubble of a man who had dressed in haste. "That's all I asked," she said, "that you try." He turned his head, pressing his lips to her palm, and she felt the kiss like a brand. Promise and possibility, and the first trembling edge of something neither of them was ready to name. The Dowager Duchess of Hartwell arrived in a carriage that made Sebastian's look modest, attended by 2 footmen, a lady's maid, and an air of absolute authority that preceded her into the vicarage like a siege engine. She was small. That was Evangeline's first surprise. Somehow she had expected a woman of Amazonian proportions, a physical manifestation of the formidable reputation. But Augusta Ashworth was barely 5 feet tall, delicately boned, with silver hair swept up in an elaborate style and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "So," she said, surveying the vicarage parlour with an expression that suggested she was cataloguing every worn cushion and faded curtain. "This is where my nephew's bride was raised." "Aunt Augusta." Sebastian stepped forward, his posture rigid with tension Evangeline recognized. "May I present my wife, Evangeline, Duchess of Hartwell." Evangeline dropped into the curtsy she had practiced all morning. "Your Grace, it is an honor to meet you." "Is it?" The Dowager's voice was dry. "I rather doubt that. Rise, girl. Let me look at you." Evangeline straightened, meeting those sharp eyes without flinching. The Dowager examined her with clinical thoroughness, her dress, her hair, her posture, her hands. "Vicar's daughter," she said finally. "No fortune, no connections, no particular beauty. Tell me, child, what precisely do you offer my nephew that he could not have found in 100 drawing-rooms across London?" "Honesty." Evangeline kept her voice steady. "Directness. A willingness to tell him when he's being a fool." Silence fell. Sebastian had gone very still beside her. The Dowager's expression revealed nothing. Then, incredibly, the old woman laughed. "Well," she settled into the best chair without being invited, arranging her skirts with the ease of long practice. "At least you have spirit. That's more than I expected from a country nobody." "Aunt," Sebastian began, warning in his voice. "Oh, hush. If the girl can't handle plain speaking, she has no business being a duchess." The Dowager's eyes fixed on Evangeline again. "Sit, child. We have much to discuss, you and I." Evangeline sat, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. Sebastian remained standing, a protective presence at her shoulder. "You've created quite the scandal," the Dowager continued. "A midnight wedding in a ruined church. A vicar's pronouncement with half the village as witness. It's the most entertainment society has had in months. I regret any embarrassment to the family." "Do you? How fortunate." The Dowager's smile was thin. "The question is not whether you regret it, but what you intend to do about it. You are Duchess of Hartwell now, like it or not. That title carries expectations, obligations that cannot be shirked simply because you were not raised to them." "I have never shirked an obligation in my life." "No, I don't suppose you have." The Dowager's gaze flicked to Sebastian. "She has steel, this one. I'm not sure whether to be impressed or alarmed." "You should be both," Sebastian said quietly. "I am." Something passed between aunt and nephew, a communication Evangeline couldn't quite read. Then the Dowager nodded, a sharp, decisive gesture. "Very well. I will stay 1 week, time enough to assess the situation and provide what guidance I can. You will listen to my counsel, girl, whether you like it or not. And when I leave, you will be prepared to take your place in society without embarrassing this family further." "And if I refuse your counsel?" The dowager's eyebrows rose. "Then you will make your own mistakes and suffer the consequences. I am not your enemy, child, whatever you may think. I am simply a woman who has spent 50 years navigating the treacherous waters of society and has no patience for those who refuse to learn from experience." It was not a warm welcome, but it was not the attack Evangeline had expected either. She looked at Sebastian, saw the surprise barely hidden behind his careful mask, and felt something like hope stirring. "1 week," she said. "I accept your terms, Your Grace." "Augusta." The dowager's smile softened almost imperceptibly. "If we are to spend a week in each other's company, you might as well use my name." The week that followed was the most exhausting of Evangeline's life. Augusta Ashworth was relentless. She drilled Evangeline on etiquette, precedents, table settings, forms of address. She criticized her wardrobe, her posture, her accent, her tendency to speak too directly. She was cutting, demanding, and utterly without mercy. She was also, Evangeline gradually realized, exactly what she needed. "You have potential," Augusta announced on the 4th day, as they took tea in the vicarage parlor. Sebastian had been banished for the afternoon, leaving them to what the dowager called women's business. "Your manners are acceptable if unfashionable, and you have the intelligence to learn quickly, but you lack polish, girl, refinement, the kind of effortless grace that marks true breeding. I was not bred for this life, obviously, but breeding can be compensated for with sufficient effort. The question is whether you're willing to make that effort." Evangeline set down her teacup. "May I speak frankly, Your Grace?" "Augusta. And yes, I find I prefer your frankness to the simpering agreement I usually receive. I did not marry Sebastian for his title. I did not scheme to become a duchess. The circumstances that brought us together were genuinely accidental, and if there had been any honorable way to avoid marriage, I would have taken it. And yet here you are. And yet here I am." Evangeline met the older woman's eyes. "I cannot undo what has been done. I can only move forward, trying to be the wife Sebastian deserves and the duchess this family requires. If your counsel can help me achieve that, I will listen. But I will not pretend to be something I am not, and I will not apologize for my origins or my character." Augusta studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "My nephew," she said, "was a different boy before his mother died. Warm, open, quick to laugh. Her death changed him, made him more serious, more guarded. And then the business with his brother." She shook her head. "He has spent 7 years punishing himself for something that was not his fault, building walls so high no one could breach them. I had given up hope that anyone ever would. I don't know that I have breached them. You have made a start." Augusta's voice softened. "The way he looks at you, the way he speaks of you, it is not the way he looks or speaks of anyone else. You have reached something in him, child, something I thought dead beyond resurrection." Evangeline felt heat rise in her cheeks. "We barely know each other." "Knowledge comes with time. What matters is the foundation." Augusta leaned forward. "Let me tell you something about the Ashworth men, since you have married one and will likely raise others. They feel deeply, too deeply, some would say. They love with an intensity that can be destructive if unchecked. Sebastian's grandfather nearly bankrupted the estate pursuing a woman who did not love him in return. His father drove away everyone who might have helped him after his wife's death. His brother..." She paused. "Well, you know what happened to his brother. Sebastian fears he carries the same capacity for destruction. Yes, and he is not wrong to fear it." Augusta's gaze was steady. "But the capacity for great destruction is also the capacity for great devotion. If Sebastian learns to love you, truly love you, he will be the most faithful, dedicated husband any woman could wish for. The question is whether you can survive the learning. What do you mean? I mean that he will fight it. Every step of the way, he will resist the very thing that could save him. He will push you away, find fault, create distance. He will do everything in his power to prove that he is not worthy of love, because accepting that he might be would require him to risk everything. Augusta's voice dropped. The woman who destroyed his family taught him that love is manipulation, that trust leads only to betrayal. You will have to teach him differently, and it will not be easy. Evangeline absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. The pattern Augusta described it matched everything she had observed. Sebastian's careful distance, his sudden moments of warmth followed by retreat, the way he seemed startled by his own feelings. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand what you're facing. And because... Augusta hesitated, the first uncertainty Evangeline had ever seen from her. Because I failed my nephews. Both of them. I saw the danger, saw the woman working her poison, and I said nothing. I told myself it was not my place to interfere, that they were grown men capable of making their own decisions. And then Richard was dead, and Sebastian was frozen, and I had to live with the knowledge that my silence had helped destroy them both. You couldn't have known. I knew. Augusta's voice was sharp. I knew exactly what she was, and I said nothing, and my silence killed my nephew as surely as the bullet that stopped his heart. She met Evangeline's eyes. I will not make that mistake again. Whatever happens between you and Sebastian, you will not face it alone. You will have my support, my counsel, my protection. I owe that much to his mother's memory, if nothing else. It was not affection, not yet, but it was alliance, offered freely, and Evangeline recognized the value of it. Thank you, she said quietly. Augusta waved a dismissive hand. Don't thank me yet. I intend to work you mercilessly for the remainder of this week. By the time I leave, you will be prepared to enter society without embarrassing yourself, or you will have collapsed from exhaustion trying. Despite herself, Evangeline smiled. I don't collapse easily. No. Augusta's lips quirked. I don't imagine you do. The end of the week brought an unexpected development. Lady Helena Cavendish arrived in the village without warning, accompanied by her father and an entourage that suggested a social campaign rather than a casual visit. She was beautiful. Evangeline had to admit that, with raven hair and porcelain skin, and the kind of elegant figure that made even simple travelling clothes look like court dress. She was also, it became immediately clear, furious. My dear Duke, Helena swept into the vicarage parlour where Sebastian and Evangeline had been taking tea with Augusta, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. I came as soon as I heard the extraordinary news, marriage, to a country vicar's daughter. How unexpected. Sebastian rose, his expression cooling several degrees. Lady Helena, I was not aware you were visiting the area. A happy coincidence. Her eyes swept over Evangeline with barely concealed contempt. You must be the bride. How quaint. Lady Helena. Evangeline inclined her head, refusing to rise to the bait. Welcome to our humble village. Humble indeed. Helena's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. Tell me, how did you manage to trap the most elusive bachelor in England? The ton is simply dying to know. There was no trap. Sebastian's voice was ice. The circumstances of our marriage are well documented. Oh yes, the collapsed roof, the convenient storm. Helena's eyes glittered. So romantic, almost as if it were staged. The implication hung in the air. Evangeline felt her temper rising but forced it down. This woman wanted a reaction, wanted to provoke her into some vulgar display that could be reported back to London society. "I assure you," Evangeline said mildly, "if I were capable of controlling the weather, I would put the ability to far better use than trapping unsuitable dukes." Augusta made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Sebastian's lips twitched despite his rigid posture. Helena's smile faltered. "I meant no offense, of course. I merely wondered—" "You wondered how a woman without fortune or connections could possibly attract a man like Sebastian." Evangeline rose, drawing herself to her full height. "The answer, Lady Helena, is that I did not try to attract him. I challenged him, argued with him, told him truths no one else dared speak. And somehow, against all probability, he found that more appealing than the simpering agreement he receives everywhere else." Silence fell. Helena's lovely face had gone pale with fury. "How refreshing!" Her voice was brittle. "I do hope such novelty sustains a marriage. In my experience, men tire of challenge eventually and return to what is comfortable." "Then perhaps your experience has been with the wrong men." Sebastian stepped to Evangeline's side, his hand coming to rest at the small of her back. "I find myself more intrigued by my wife each day, not less. But I thank you for your concern." The dismissal was absolute. Helena stood frozen for a moment, her composure cracking. Then she swept toward the door, pausing only to deliver a final barb. "I do hope you're not too overwhelmed by your new position, Mrs. Forgive me, Your Grace." She stumbled deliberately over the title. "Society can be terribly unforgiving of those who don't quite fit." The door closed behind her with more force than necessary. Augusta broke the silence first. "Well, that was entertaining. That was a declaration of war." Sebastian's hand remained at Evangeline's back, warm and steady. "Helena has never accepted rejection gracefully, and she has connections throughout London society. She will do everything in her power to make your life difficult. Then I will simply have to survive it." Evangeline turned to face him. "I am not afraid of her, Sebastian." "You should be." His grey eyes were worried. "She is clever, vindictive, and well-connected. She can destroy reputations with a whisper." "Then we give her nothing to whisper about." Augusta rose, brushing off her skirts. "From this moment forward, you will be the perfect Duchess, gracious, elegant, above reproach. You will give her no ammunition, no weakness to exploit. And when you finally take your place in society, you will do it with such impeccable dignity that even Lady Helena Cavendish cannot touch you." It sounded exhausting. It sounded terrifying. But Evangeline straightened her shoulders and nodded. "Teach me," she said. "Teach me everything." The third week of Evangeline's marriage brought a shift she hadn't expected. Sebastian began staying later each day, finding excuses to extend their time together. He brought books from London classical texts he had ordered specially, volumes on ancient civilizations that made her eyes light up in a way that seemed to fascinate him. He asked questions about her childhood, her dreams, the person she might have been if circumstances had been different. And he began to touch her. Small touches at first, his hand at her elbow as they walked, his fingers brushing hers as he passed a teacup. Then bolder ones, his arm around her waist as they stood at the window, his lips against her hair when he thought no one was watching. Each touch sent warmth spreading through her body, awakening something that had lain dormant for so long she had forgotten it existed. She was attracted to her husband, genuinely, viscerally attracted, in a way that had nothing to do with duty or obligation. And from the heat in his grey eyes when he looked at her, from the tension in his body when they stood too close, the attraction was mutual. They were sitting in the garden one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose, when Sebastian finally broke the careful distance between them. "Evangeline." She turned to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "We have been married 3 weeks," he said quietly. "And in that time, I have come to know you better than I have known anyone in years. Your kindness, your strength, your absolute refusal to let me hide from myself." He paused, something shifting in his expression. "I find myself wanting." "Wanting what?" "You." The word was rough, stripped bare. "I want you, Evangeline, not because honor demands it, not because propriety expects it, but because you have become necessary to me, in ways I do not fully understand and cannot seem to resist." Her heart was pounding. "Sebastian, I know we agreed to a month. I know there are still questions, still doubts." He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw with devastating gentleness. "But I am asking you now, will you be my wife in truth? Not an arrangement, not a convenience, but a real marriage, with all that entails." She should think about this. She should be sensible, practical, careful, all the things she had been her entire life. But looking into his eyes, those grey eyes that had thawed so beautifully over these weeks, she found she didn't want to be careful anymore. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Sebastian, I will." He kissed her then, and the world fell away. His lips were warm against hers, tentative at first, then growing bolder as she responded. One hand cupped her face while the other pulled her closer, and she felt the careful control he always maintained beginning to crack. This was not the Ice Duke who had arrived at her door 3 weeks ago. This was Sebastian, wounded and hopeful, and desperately wanting something he was terrified to need. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, his forehead rested against hers. "I should go," he murmured, "before I do something that shocks your father. He's been expecting this for days. Prudence told him it was inevitable. Your sister is too romantic for her own good." "Perhaps. But she wasn't wrong, was she?" Evangeline pulled back slightly, meeting his eyes. "This was always going to happen. From the moment you knelt in the mud to help Thomas find his rabbit." "That rabbit," he laughed softly. "If someone had told me that a rabbit would change my life, then you wouldn't have believed them." She touched his face, marveling that she was allowed to do so. "None of this should have happened. None of it makes sense. And yet, here we are. Here we are." He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise rather than a question. Then he rose, pulling her to her feet. "Tomorrow," he said, "we will begin making arrangements for you to come to Hartwell Park. It's time I faced my ghosts, and time you saw what you've married into. I'm not afraid of ghosts. You should be." But he was smiling, that rare, genuine smile she had grown to treasure. "Mine are particularly persistent." He left her standing in the garden as the last light faded, her lips still tingling from his kiss, her heart full of a hope she had never expected to feel. She was falling in love with her husband, and against all odds, she believed he might be falling in love with her too. The 4th week began with sunshine and ended in ruins. Preparations for Evangeline's move to Hartwell Park were underway, and the vicarage hummed with activity. Trunks were packed, farewells were planned, and Thomas had made her promise at least 7 times that he could visit and see the Duke's horses. Sebastian was lighter than she had ever seen him, still guarded with others, but with her, something had opened. He laughed more. He touched her freely, casually, as if he had been doing it for years. He spoke of the future, their future, with a certainty that made her chest ache with happiness. It couldn't last. She should have known it couldn't last. The assembly in the nearby town of Ashworth was a modest affair by London standards, but for the village it was the social event of the season. As the newly married Duchess of Hartwell, Evangeline was expected to attend on her husband's arm their first public appearance as a couple. She dressed carefully, in a gown Augusta had helped her select, with her hair pinned in a style that was elegant without being ostentatious. When Sebastian saw her descending the stairs, his expression made every hour of preparation worthwhile. "You are exquisite," he said quietly, taking her hand. "You sound surprised." "Not surprised. Grateful." He pressed a kiss to her palm. "Shall we scandalize the countryside together?" The assembly was everything Augusta had warned her about: curious eyes, whispered comments, society matrons assessing her worth with every glance. But Sebastian stayed by her side, his hand at her waist, and gradually the whispers faded into background noise. They danced, and Evangeline discovered that her husband moved with unexpected grace. They talked with neighbours, accepted congratulations, played the part of a happily married couple so well that she forgot they were playing at all. Lady Helena arrived late, making an entrance designed to draw every eye. Her gown was stunning, her beauty undeniable, her smile sharp as broken glass. "Your Grace," she curtsied to Evangeline with mocking precision. "How delightful to see you looking so comfortable in your new role." "Thank you, Lady Helena. I find comfort comes easily when one is content." "Content?" Helena's laugh was brittle. "Such a modest ambition. I suppose contentment is all one can hope for in a marriage of convenience." "Our marriage," Sebastian said coldly, "is no longer your concern." "Is it not?" Helena's eyes glittered. "Then perhaps the circumstances of your courtship are not my concern either. Perhaps the truth about what really happened that night in the church. There is no truth beyond what has already been told." Evangeline felt ice forming in her stomach, though she kept her voice steady. "A storm, a collapsed roof, an honourable resolution. An honourable resolution to a situation someone very carefully arranged." Helena's smile widened. "Tell me, Your Grace, did you know the roof had been weakened deliberately? Did you know that someone ensured it would collapse at precisely the right moment to trap you together?" The noise of the assembly seemed to fade. Evangeline was aware of Sebastian going rigid beside her, of faces turning toward them, of the horrible understanding dawning in his grey eyes. "What are you saying?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "I'm saying that your romantic accident was no accident at all." Helena produced a folded paper from her reticule. "I have here a statement from the builder who weakened those beams. He was paid quite handsomely, though he claims not to know by whom. But the timing, the precision, the convenient outcome." Her eyes fixed on Evangeline. "Someone wanted you trapped with the Duke. Someone wanted this marriage to happen." "That's absurd." Evangeline's voice sounded strange to her own ears. "I had never even met the Duke before that day. Why would I?" "Why indeed?" Helena's expression was pure venom. A vicar's daughter with no prospects. Suddenly Duchess of Hartwell, a family on the edge of poverty, suddenly guaranteed security for life. "Tell me, Your Grace, what wouldn't you do for such an opportunity?" "Enough." Sebastian's hand closed around Evangeline's arm, not gently, not with the tenderness she had grown accustomed to, but with the rigid control of a man barely containing his fury. "This conversation is over." He steered her away from Helena, away from the staring crowd, out through a side door into the cool night air. Evangeline stumbled after him, her mind reeling. "Sebastian, don't." He released her arm, stepping back as if her touch burned. "Don't say anything. You can't believe her. You can't possibly believe I would." "What am I supposed to believe?" His voice cracked. She has evidence, Evangeline. A confession from the man who sabotaged the roof. The timing, the circumstances, it all fits. It fits a narrative she's constructed to destroy us. Evangeline heard her voice rising, felt tears threatening. I didn't do this. I didn't plan anything. The storm, the collapse, it was all accident, all chance. Was it? His grey eyes were cold again, so cold, all the warmth of the past weeks frozen solid. Or have I been played for a fool once more? Have I learned nothing from what happened with my brother? The words hit her like a physical blow. I am not that woman. Her voice shook. I am not the person who destroyed your family. How can you even compare? How can I not? He laughed, a terrible sound devoid of all humour. A beautiful woman, an elaborate scheme, a man too stupid to see the manipulation until it was too late. The circumstances are different, but the pattern... He shook his head. I should have known. I should have seen it. There is nothing to see. I am innocent. Everyone is innocent until they're not. He turned away, presenting her with the rigid line of his back. I need time to think, to investigate, to understand what has actually happened here. Sebastian, please, go back to your family, Evangeline. His voice was flat, empty. I will send word when I have decided what to do. And then he walked away, leaving her standing alone in the darkness, her reputation in tatters and her heart in pieces. Evangeline did not cry. She stood in the darkness outside the assembly hall until her legs began to shake, until the cold night air had numbed her fingers and her face, until she was certain she could walk back inside without breaking. Then she found her father, pleaded a headache, and allowed him to take her home in their modest carriage, while the whispers followed her like a plague of locusts. She did not cry in the carriage, while her father patted her hand and murmured confused reassurances. She did not cry when they reached the vicarage, and Prudence met them at the door with worried eyes and 100 questions. She did not cry when she climbed the stairs to her small bedroom and closed the door behind her, shutting out the world and everything in it. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, Sebastian's signet ring still on the chain around her neck, and she breathed. In, out, in, out. She had survived worse than this. She had buried her mother and raised her siblings and managed a household on nothing. She had endured years of loneliness, of invisibility, of being needed by everyone and known by no one. She had built walls of her own, different from Sebastian's but just as high, and she had survived behind them. She would survive this too. But somewhere in the dark hours before dawn, when the house was silent and there was no one to see, the tears came anyway. 3 days passed without word from Sebastian. Evangeline moved through the hours like a ghost, performing the duties that had defined her life for so long. They felt like extensions of her body. She helped Thomas with his lessons. She counselled Prudence against her continued correspondence with Mr. Crawford. She assisted her father with parish visits and household accounts and the endless small emergencies that arose in a vicarage full of children. She did not speak of what had happened at the assembly. She did not need to. The village buzzed with gossip, stories growing more elaborate with each retelling. By the 3rd day, the rumours had her orchestrating not only the roof collapse, but the original storm, using dark arts she had learned from a fictional grandmother who had allegedly been burned as a witch. The absurdity of it would have made her laugh once. Now she simply endured. On the morning of the 4th day, Augusta Ashworth arrived at the vicarage unannounced. Evangeline was in the garden, weeding the herb bed because physical labour was the only thing that quieted her mind, when the dowager's carriage clattered into the yard. She rose, brushing dirt from her apron, and waited while the old woman descended with the assistance of her footman. "You look dreadful," Augusta announced without preamble. "Thank you, Your Grace." You look well yourself. Don't be pert." But there was something almost approving in the dowager's expression as she surveyed Evangeline's dishevelled state. "You haven't collapsed, at least. I half expected to find you in bed with a bottle of laudanum." "I don't collapse." "No, I'm beginning to believe you don't." Augusta gestured toward the house. "Shall we go inside? What I have to tell you shouldn't be heard by the entire village." The parlour felt smaller than ever with Augusta in it, her presence filling the space like a force of nature. She settled into the best chair, the one Sebastian had favoured, and fixed Evangeline with her sharp blue gaze. "I have spent the past 3 days investigating Lady Helena's claims," she said without preamble. "The builder she mentioned, a man named Josiah Pike, did indeed confess to weakening the church roof beams. He was paid £50 for the work, delivered to him in cash by an intermediary he claimed not to recognize." Evangeline's heart sank. "Then her accusations are false." Augusta's voice was flat. "The intermediary has been identified as a servant in Lady Helena's own household. She arranged the sabotage herself." For a moment, Evangeline couldn't process the words. "She... what?" "Lady Helena Cavendish orchestrated the entire scheme. She paid Pike to damage the roof, hoping that a scandal would attach to Sebastian, that he would be forced to retire from society in disgrace, making him more vulnerable to her manipulations. She never intended for your father to declare you married. She expected a scandal requiring rescue, positioning herself as Sebastian's salvation." Augusta's lip curled. Her plan went awry when the Reverend proved more concerned with his daughter's virtue than she anticipated. But if she arranged it, why accuse me? Because when her original scheme failed to produce the desired result, she adapted. If she couldn't have Sebastian, she would at least ensure no one else could have him happily. By accusing you, she drove a wedge into your marriage at its most vulnerable point. Augusta leaned forward. She knew about Sebastian's history. She knew exactly which wounds to reopen. Evangeline sat very still, processing the enormity of what she was hearing. Helena had arranged everything: the collapse, the accusations, the destruction of her marriage. Not out of love for Sebastian, but out of spite, out of wounded vanity, out of the petty cruelty of a woman who could not bear to see someone else have what she wanted. "Does Sebastian know?" "He knows." Augusta's expression flickered, something like pain crossing her features. "I told him myself, an hour ago." "And?" "And he said nothing. He sat like a stone while I explained what I had discovered, and when I finished, he thanked me for the information and asked to be left alone." The dowager's voice softened slightly. "He is not handling this well, Evangeline. He accused me of manipulating him, of being the same as the woman who destroyed his brother." Evangeline heard the flatness in her own voice and couldn't seem to change it. "He looked at me like I was a stranger, worse than a stranger, like I was an enemy. He was afraid. That doesn't excuse—" "No, it doesn't." Augusta held up a hand. "I'm not asking you to excuse him. I'm asking you to understand. Sebastian has spent 7 years believing that love leads only to destruction. When Helena presented evidence that his worst fears were true, he didn't question it because questioning it meant hoping, and hope is the most dangerous thing in the world to a man who has been betrayed. I had done nothing to warrant his distrust. Nothing except love him." "I know." Augusta's voice was gentle now, gentler than Evangeline had ever heard it. "But love itself was the problem, don't you see? The moment he began to love you, he became vulnerable. And vulnerable to Sebastian means wounded, means destroyed. His reaction wasn't rational, but it was entirely predictable to anyone who understood his wounds. Then his wounds have wounded me in turn." Evangeline rose, moving to the window where she had watched Sebastian arrive so many times before. I cannot simply forgive this, Augusta. I cannot pretend it didn't happen. No one is asking you to pretend, but I am asking you to consider what happens next. The dowager's voice sharpened. You are married, Evangeline. That cannot be undone easily, if at all. You can spend the rest of your life as Sebastian's estranged wife, living separately, speaking rarely, growing bitter and old in parallel loneliness. Or you can fight for something better. Why should I be the one to fight? He's the one who accused me. He's the one who walked away. Because you are stronger than he is. Augusta said it simply, as if stating an obvious fact. Sebastian is brilliant and capable and utterly devastated by his own history. He will not come to you first, not because he doesn't want to, but because he genuinely believes he has destroyed any chance of reconciliation. He believes you could never forgive him, and therefore there is no point in asking. Perhaps he's right. Is he? Augusta rose, crossing to stand beside her at the window. Look me in the eye, child, and tell me you feel nothing for my nephew. Tell me that the past weeks meant nothing, that his touch didn't move you, his words didn't reach you, his rare smiles didn't make your heart race. Tell me that, and I will leave you alone to your righteous anger. Evangeline opened her mouth to say exactly that. The words were there, lined up neatly. I feel nothing. He means nothing. I want nothing from him. But they wouldn't come out, because they weren't true. Despite everything, despite his accusations, his coldness, his devastating willingness to believe the worst of her, she still loved him. Foolishly, furiously, helplessly loved him. The man who had knelt at her feet and promised to try. The man who had kissed her in the garden and spoken of wanting. The man who existed beneath the ice, wounded and hopeful, and so afraid of his own heart. Damn him, she whispered. Yes. Augusta's hand came to rest on her shoulder. Damn him indeed. But perhaps also save him, if you can find it in yourself. He is not worthy of your forgiveness, not yet. But he could be, if someone believes in him enough to demand it. Evangeline went to Hartwell Park the next morning. She had never seen Sebastian's ancestral home before, and even through the fog of her complicated emotions, she could appreciate its grandeur. The house rose from manicured grounds like something from a fairy tale, pale stone, countless windows, a portico supported by columns that spoke of centuries of wealth and power. It was beautiful and imposing and utterly unlike the modest vicarage where she had spent her life. The butler who answered her knock was the picture of professional composure, but she saw the flicker of surprise in his eyes when she announced herself. The Duchess of Hartwell. I'm here to see my husband. She had never used the title before. It felt strange on her tongue, but also right. She was the Duchess of Hartwell, whether Sebastian acknowledged it or not. She had earned that title, earned it through weeks of trying, of hoping, of giving herself to a man who hadn't yet learned how to receive. The butler led her through corridors lined with portraits of Ashworth ancestors, their painted eyes seeming to follow her progress. She caught glimpses of elegant rooms, fine furniture, evidence of a wealth beyond anything she had imagined. But beneath the grandeur, she sensed something else, emptiness, stillness, a house that had stopped being a home long ago. Sebastian was in the library. Of course he was in the library. It was the room he had described most often, the place where he had spent his happiest childhood hours before tragedy reshaped his world. He sat in a chair by the window, a book open in his lap, but he wasn't reading. He was staring at nothing, his face haggard in a way that suggested sleepless nights and tormented days. He looked up when she entered, and she watched hope and fear and longing chase each other across his features before the familiar mask descended. Evangeline? Her name in his voice, stripped of all protection. Sebastian. She didn't move from the doorway. We need to talk. Yes. He set aside the unread book, rising with visible effort. I know. Augusta told me what she discovered. I know the truth now that Helena arranged everything, that you were innocent, that I— His voice cracked. That I destroyed us for nothing. You didn't destroy us. Didn't I? He laughed, a hollow sound. I accused you of manipulation. I compared you to the woman who killed my brother. I walked away from you in front of half the county, leaving you to face the gossip alone. If that's not destruction, what is? It's betrayal. She kept her voice steady with effort. It's pain. It's a wound that will take time to heal, but destruction implies something that cannot be rebuilt, and I'm not ready to believe that yet. Something flickered in his grey eyes, hope, quickly suppressed. Why not? Why would you want to rebuild anything with me after what I did? Because I love you. The words fell into the silence between them, simple and devastating. Sebastian went very still. You shouldn't. His voice was rough. I don't deserve— No, you don't. She stepped into the room, closing the distance between them until she could see the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. You don't deserve my love, or my forgiveness, or any chance at happiness. You behaved abominably. You let fear make your decisions, and in doing so, you hurt me more than anyone has ever hurt me in my life. Evangeline, I'm not finished. She held up a hand. You broke my heart, Sebastian. You took everything I had given you, my trust, my hope, my belief that we could be something real, and you threw it away because a vindictive woman told you a clever lie. You chose to believe the worst of me without evidence, without investigation, without even asking for my side of the story. You condemned me in your heart before I ever had a chance to defend myself. He flinched, as if she had struck him. I know. Do you? Do you understand what it felt like to stand there, watching the man I loved look at me like a stranger? To hear you compare me to the woman who destroyed your family? Her voice shook despite her efforts. You knew me, Sebastian. You knew my character, my history, my heart. And you chose to believe I was capable of elaborate manipulation rather than accepting the simpler truth that we found each other by accident, by chance, by grace. I was afraid. The words came out broken. I was falling in love with you, and it terrified me. When Helena presented her evidence, part of me, God help me, part of me was almost relieved. Because if you were a schemer, if you were using me, then I didn't have to risk anything. I could retreat behind my walls and tell myself I had escaped disaster. He met her eyes, and his were bright with unshed tears. But the disaster was losing you, and I didn't understand that until you were gone. Evangeline felt her anger warring with her compassion, the fury at what he had done battling the love that refused to die despite everything. This man had wounded her deeply. But he was wounded too, scarred by a history that had taught him trust was foolish and love was dangerous. He was wrong, but he was also trying to be right. I meant what I said at the assembly, she said quietly. When we agreed to this marriage, I asked you to try, to feel, to be more than the frozen man the world believes you to be. I tried. I failed. You failed once. That's not the same as failing forever. She reached out, her fingers brushing his jaw the first time she had touched him since that terrible night. I'm asking you again, Sebastian, not to be perfect, not to never make mistakes, but to try, to fight for this instead of running from it, to choose me even when you're afraid, especially when you're afraid. How can you still want that? His voice was ragged. After everything? Because the alternative is worse. She stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth of his body. I spent 7 years not wanting anything for myself, not dreaming, not hoping, not believing I deserved more than duty and sacrifice. And then I met you, and for the first time, I wanted something. Wanted it so badly I was willing to risk everything to have it. And I destroyed that wanting. You damaged it, but it's not destroyed. Her hand slid from his jaw to rest over his heart. I still want you, Sebastian. I still love you. And I am willing to fight for our marriage if you are, but only if you fight too. I cannot do this alone. I cannot carry us both. For a long moment he didn't move. She could feel his heart racing beneath her palm, could see the battle playing out behind his eyes. Fear against hope. Habit against change. The comfortable prison of isolation against the terrifying freedom of genuine connection. I don't know how. His voice was barely a whisper. I don't know how to be the man you deserve. Then learn. She pressed her hand harder against his chest. Learn with me. Make mistakes and apologize for them. Fall short and try again. Be imperfect and broken and afraid, but be present. Be here. Don't retreat into the ice when things get difficult. And if I fail again, then we deal with it together, the way married people do. She managed a small smile. I've been told I'm rather formidable when it comes to managing crises. Something shifted in his expression. Something cracked open, releasing years of frozen emotion. She saw the moment he made his choice, saw it in the way his shoulders dropped and his hands came up to cup her face. I love you. The words were raw, unpolished, clearly unfamiliar in his mouth. I have loved you since you lectured me about my failures in a ruined church, and I have been too frightened to admit it, even to myself. I love your honesty and your strength, and your absolute refusal to let me hide. I love the way you manage your family, and the way you challenged me, and the way you saw past my walls when no one else even knew they existed. Sebastian, I'm not finished. His thumbs traced her cheekbones, gentle as a whisper. I will fail you again. Not the same way, never that way again, but in other ways, smaller ways, because I am damaged and imperfect and still learning how to be human. But I swear to you, Evangeline, on whatever honor I have left, that I will never stop trying. I will never retreat without a fight. I will never choose fear over you again. That's a significant promise. It's the most significant promise I've ever made. He rested his forehead against hers. Will you hold me to it? Will you call me on my failures and demand better, and refuse to let me settle for less than what we could be? Yes. The word came out thick with emotion. Always. He kissed her then, not the gentle kisses of their courtship, but something deeper, desperate, a claiming and a surrender all at once. She felt herself melting into him, her anger dissolving into the certainty that this was right, that they were right, that whatever difficulties lay ahead, they would face them together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, he pulled her close and held her as if afraid she might disappear. I don't deserve you, he murmured into her hair. Probably not. She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of him. But you have me anyway. Try not to waste it. His laugh was shaky but real. I'll do my best. See that you do. She pulled back to meet his eyes. Now what do we do about Lady Helena? The warmth in his expression cooled to something harder. Helena will face consequences for what she's done. I've already begun proceedings. Her actions constitute criminal sabotage, and the builder is prepared to testify against her. Will that be enough? It will be enough to ruin her socially, which is the only punishment she would truly feel. His jaw tightened. She valued her position in society above all else. Losing it will destroy her more thoroughly than any legal action. Good. Evangeline felt no guilt for the satisfaction in her voice. She tried to destroy us. She deserves to face the consequences. Bloodthirsty. His lips curved slightly. I approve. I learned from the best. She took his hand, twining her fingers through his. What happens now? Now? He looked around the library, at the house that had been his prison for so long. Now I introduce my wife to her new home. Properly this time. And then we begin building the life we should have started weeks ago. That sounds... She paused, searching for the word. That sounds wonderful, actually. It does, doesn't it? He raised their joined hands to his lips. Welcome to Hartwell Park, Evangeline. I hope you'll be happy here. She looked at him, this complicated, wounded, trying man, and felt hope bloom in her chest for the first time in days. I think I will be, she said. Eventually. The months that followed were not easy. Rebuilding trust was harder than building it the first time, and there were days when old wounds reopened unexpectedly. Sebastian retreated sometimes, caught in patterns of behavior too deeply ingrained to break overnight. Evangeline's patience frayed, and words were exchanged that both regretted. But they kept trying. They developed rituals, morning tea together, evening walks through the grounds, a weekly dinner where they practiced the radical honesty they had promised each other. Sebastian learned to recognize when his walls were going up and to fight them down before they became barriers. Evangeline learned to ask for help when she needed it, to accept that leaning on her husband was not weakness. The Blackwood family visited often. Thomas became a regular fixture at Hartwell Park, absorbed in the library and the stables and the endless wonders of a great estate. Prudence abandoned Mr. Crawford entirely after meeting a young naval lieutenant at Evangeline's first ball as Duchess, a match that eventually led to a quiet wedding and a posting to Portsmouth. Marcus came to discuss theology with Sebastian and left with a respect for the Duke that he had never expected to feel. Augusta remained a frequent presence, her sharp tongue somewhat softened by genuine affection. She had found in Evangeline the daughter she never had, and in watching her nephew slowly thaw, a redemption for her own past failures. The scandal Lady Helena had tried to create became, as Sebastian predicted, a romantic legend. The story of the Duke who fell in love with a vicar's daughter in a ruined church, who defied society to marry her, who was nearly torn apart by a jealous rival, but emerged stronger for the trial. It was the kind of tale that captured imaginations. Evangeline found herself celebrated rather than condemned, her straightforward manner and obvious devotion to her husband winning over even the most determined critics. Helena herself disappeared from society entirely, her reputation destroyed by the exposure of her schemes. Rumours placed her in various locations, a convent in France, a distant cousin's estate in Scotland, a small house in the countryside where she lived in genteel poverty. Evangeline found she didn't care where Helena was, as long as she was nowhere near Hartwell Park. A year after their chaotic wedding, Evangeline gave birth to their first child, a son, dark-haired like his father, but with his mother's warm brown eyes. They named him Edward, after Sebastian's grandfather, the man who had built Hartwell Park and dreamed of a dynasty. He's perfect. Sebastian sat on the edge of the bed where Evangeline rested with their son in her arms, his voice hushed with wonder. Completely perfect. He's red and wrinkled and rather loud. But she was smiling. Though I suppose he'll improve with time. He has your stubbornness already. Sebastian touched the baby's tiny hand, his finger engulfed by a miniature grip. He refused to arrive until he was ready, regardless of what anyone else wanted. That sounds more like your stubbornness to me. Perhaps. He leaned down to kiss her forehead. Perhaps he has the best of both of us. She looked at him, her husband, the father of her child, the man who had learned to love despite his fear, and felt her heart swell with a contentment she had never imagined possible. He has everything he needs, she said softly, A home, a family, parents who chose each other deliberately, consciously, every single day. Is that what we do? His voice was thoughtful. Choose each other? It's what we should do. What I want to do for the rest of our lives. She shifted Edward to one arm and reached for Sebastian with the other. I choose you, Sebastian Ashworth. Today and tomorrow and all the days after that. I choose you even when you're difficult, even when I'm tired, even when the world makes it hard. You are my choice, freely made, and I don't regret it for a moment. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he bent and kissed her, soft and tender and full of promise. I choose you too, he murmured against her lips. Today and always. You and Edward and whatever children come after. This family, this life, this love that I never believed I could have. Edward chose that moment to wail, breaking the romantic spell with practical demands that could not be ignored. They both laughed, the easy laughter of partners who had weathered storms together and emerged stronger for the trial. Your son requires attention, Sebastian said, retreating to give her space. My son? He's your son when he's inconvenient? Naturally. That's how parenthood works, I'm told. She swatted at him, missed, and turned her attention to soothing their child. But her heart was full to overflowing with a happiness she had never dared to want. 8 years later, on a summer afternoon much like the one that had changed everything, Evangeline sat on the terrace of Hartwell Park and watched her family scattered across the lawn. Edward, now 8, and looking more like his father every day, was attempting to teach his younger sister Charlotte to ride the pony Sebastian had given her for her 6th birthday. Charlotte, golden-haired and imperious, and possessing every ounce of her grandmother's formidable personality, was having none of his instructions, insisting she knew perfectly well how to manage the creature herself. Thomas, now 16 and preparing for university, had arrived yesterday for the summer. He sat under a tree with a book, occasionally looking up to call encouragement to Charlotte or roll his eyes at Edward's bossiness. Prudence's 2 children ran wild somewhere in the gardens, their shrieks of laughter floating up to the terrace like music. The vicarage had new occupants now, a young minister and his wife, who had taken over when Reverend Blackwood finally retired to the comfortable cottage Sebastian had built for him on the estate grounds. The old man spent his days with his beloved books, occasionally tottering over to the main house to debate theology with his son-in-law or spoil his grandchildren with sweets. Augusta had passed 2 winters ago, peacefully in her sleep, leaving behind a legacy of acid wit and unexpected kindness. She had seen Edward born, had held Charlotte in her arms, had watched her nephew transform from a frozen shell into a loving husband and father. Her last words to Evangeline had been characteristic. Don't let him backslide. The boy needs constant supervision. Evangeline smiled at the memory, touching the small cameo Augusta had left her, the only piece of jewelry the dowager had truly valued. What are you thinking about? She turned to find Sebastian emerging onto the terrace, 2 glasses of lemonade in his hands. The years had been kind to him. The silver at his temples had spread, but his face had softened, the harsh lines of his youth smoothed by contentment. He smiled easily now, laughed readily, showed affection without reservation. He was not the same man who had arrived at her father's vicarage all those years ago. Neither was she the same woman who had greeted him with mud on her apron and frogs in her parlour. Augusta, she said, accepting the lemonade. And how much has changed? Everything has changed. He settled into the chair beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Sometimes I hardly recognize my own life. Is that a complaint? God, no. He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. It's gratitude. Profound, constant, overwhelming gratitude for the storm that trapped us together and the father-in-law who married us before we knew what was happening. Father maintains he saw it immediately, the way we were meant to be together. Your father also maintains that sheep's skull proves something about mortality. I'm not sure I trust his observational skills." She laughed, leaning into him. "He was right about us, though. He was right about us." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play. Charlotte had finally achieved some sort of harmony with the pony and was trotting in increasingly confident circles. Edward looked torn between pride and annoyance at being proven unnecessary. Thomas had abandoned his book to offer suggestions that neither sibling wanted. "Do you remember what you said to me?" Sebastian asked quietly. "That first day, in the vestry, when the storm trapped us? I said many things, most of them impertinent. You asked what I was afraid of." He turned to look at her, his grey eyes warm. "I didn't answer then. I couldn't. But I'll answer now, if you'd like." "Tell me." "I was afraid of exactly this." He gestured at the lawn, at their children, at the life they had built. "I was afraid of wanting something so much that losing it would destroy me. I was afraid that love would make me vulnerable, and vulnerable would make me weak, and weak would make me dangerous to myself and everyone around me. And now I understand that I had it backwards." He squeezed her hand. "Love doesn't make you vulnerable. It makes you strong. Loving you, loving our children, being loved in return. It's the source of every good thing in my life. The courage to be better. The reason to try." He paused, something shifting in his expression. "You saved me, Evangeline. That night in the church, when you refused to let me hide behind my walls, you saved me from a lifetime of frozen emptiness. I don't know if I've ever properly thanked you. You've thanked me every day, every time you chose to stay instead of retreat. Every time you fought through your fear instead of giving in to it." She lifted their joined hands and pressed a kiss to his knuckles. "You've thanked me with Edward and Charlotte, and this beautiful life we've built together. That's all the thanks I need." "Papa! Mama!" Charlotte's voice rang across the lawn. "Watch me! I'm going to make Buttercup jump." "Charlotte Ashworth, don't you dare!" But Sebastian was already rising, striding across the terrace and down the steps to intercept their daughter before she could attempt anything too ambitious. Evangeline watched him go, this man who had once been frozen and was now so wonderfully, thoroughly alive. He reached Charlotte and swept her off the pony, her protests dissolving into giggles as he tickled her mercilessly. Edward rolled his eyes in theatrical disgust, but was smiling. Thomas had joined them, and soon all four were engaged in some complicated game that involved much running and shouting. Her family, her life, her future, stretching out before her like a road paved with possibility. She remembered standing in the vicarage parlour, covered in frog water, and dreading a meeting with a cold duke. She remembered thinking she wanted nothing for herself, that sacrifice was the same as virtue, that she was destined for a life of quiet duty and careful loneliness. How wrong she had been. How wonderfully, gloriously wrong. The accident that brought them together had seemed like disaster at the time. A collapsed roof, a forced marriage, a pronouncement from her father that had changed everything in an instant. "That wasn't a proposal," Sebastian had said, bewildered and brilliant, and not yet aware of what he was feeling. "The vicar disagrees," her father had replied. And they had both been right, in their own ways. It hadn't been a proposal, not the kind either of them would have chosen. But it had been a beginning, a door opening onto a life neither had dared to imagine. Sebastian looked up from the lawn, caught her eye, and smiled that rare, beautiful smile that still made her heart race after all these years. She smiled back and went to join her family.